Direct to disc means that you take the musicians,
Yeah.
you put them into the studio, you have microphones going to them,
Right.
going right to the mixing engineer.
Right.
The mixing engineer mixes in real time, because solos, he's got to push one up, vocals, he's got to push that down, so he's mixing in real time. It goes to a mastering engineer who's mastering in real time. It goes to the lathe, and it cuts the lacquer.
Okay.
So it's nothing in between. And that is the toughest part of direct-to-disc. Because take the recording engineer's job. If what you can do is multi-track, and after you finish the multi-track, you can play it back and forth and adjust levels and do the EQ and the compression and all. Some compression is always needed. Some reverb is always needed. So how you do all that is, a lot of it is in the digital domain. Reverb, for example, some recording engineer tells me that it sounds better in digital domain than using analog reverb. But the best sounding reverb, everybody tells me, is an EMT 140. An EMT 140 is basically two plates that's the size of a room. One plate is actuated and the other plate is records it. So you just separate the plates and tune the plates with mechanical riders to change the sound of the reverb. That's what we use for this album. So that's why we say this album is 100% analog. There's no digital gets into the chain anywhere. Not even a switch mode power supply for a monitor. We make sure of that.
Where does the tape copy that you made, what does that feed off of?
It feeds off of the input into the mastering console towards the lathe. You see, the lathe will still need RIAA pre-emphasis before it goes to do the actual cutting. So one step before the lathe was where we fed off the tape. So it goes into what Bernie did as part of mastering. You see, with mastering, he also understands that there is some compression needed on the part of the lathe. There's some EQ needed, and it was really fascinating watching the two of them, because this might be one of the very few times you get a mastering engineer and a recording engineer talking to each other and going, okay, you push half a dB there, I'll push half a dB here. Okay, no, you take that half dB off, I'll go 1 dB here. And they are doing this, and I sit there going, I can't hear what they are doing, I thought I had good ears, but these two guys are going half dB increments on this. You do half a dB there, I'll do half, and boom. And what results is basically is amazing. It's like sitting next to Bernie when he did the remastering of Blue Mind. He'll play and he'll push buttons, he'll click, and I don't hear every little thing he does, but at the end of it, after he finishes it, I looked at him and okay, I'll show you. Off, direct, and then on. And all of a sudden it's like she's more there, she's more musical, she's happier, she sounds her age rather than sounding too young or too old. And how he does that, I have no idea. And it's a pure analog mastering console. He's got one of the last pure analog mastering consoles. He's also got two lathes. One is driven by solid-state electronics and one is driven by tube electronics. And for the direct disc session, we cut the sample lacquers, we listen to the two, and we pick one of the lathes. The two lathes, they sound just as good, but they sound slightly different. And because of what we wanted to do, Bernie elected to use the solid-state lathe rather than the vacuum tube lathe. Because he said, look, your microphones are good enough, your recording engineer is good enough, your musicians are good enough that we don't need the softness of the tube. Let's go for the accuracy.
Is Mr. Grundman mentoring any younger people to teach them
got three
how
guys.
he does his stuff?
He's got three guys who are his mastering engineers. So if you go to Bernie Grundman Mastering, he's still the senior engineer, and there are three other guys. Scott Cedilio is better with the digital stuff. Chris, can't remember his surname. Chris is better with the analog stuff, and the two of them are actually pretty damn good. I've heard things that were mastered by these two guys, and they are pretty damn good. Scott is going to do the CD of Four Seasons, so he will take the backup digital master. The backup digital master we took again off the same place we took off the tape feed, and he will do that as a CD. But yeah, Bernie is a treasure. What he does is quite amazing. Yes.
So have you already sold all 3,000 copies?
Yes. Well, the 3,000 copies sold to all the distributors. So now the distributors can sell them. What we did for this is we actually allocated out to distributors around the world, because I wanted my customers around the world to be able to have access to this album, so that they can hear what ultimately we are able to get in terms of sound quality. So we've allocated 600 to the US, we allocated like 100 to Canada. Unfortunately, we were only going to allocate 100 to Hong Kong, but unfortunately they sold 200 during the audio show. So they've bought 600 copies as well for Hong Kong and China. So it's all sold out.
When you said CD, what format?
CD, Red Book.
Not super audio format?
SA CDs, we may produce it next year, because the SA CDs, I think we want to go back to the tapes and pick the best cuts. You see, with a direct-to-disc, we ran, one of the sites, for example, we ran 5 takes, because in one of the takes, somebody shuffled something, and in another take, the pianist made a mistake, and she screwed up the second track, but the first track and third track were wonderful. So for the SACD, the plan is to go back to the tapes and pick out the best tracks, the best takes of each track. Whereas for the LP, we had to pick the best sides, on average.
What did you pick for the CD?
Not yet. I haven't picked for a CD yet.
Oh, okay. So
Hang on.
As you cut the lacquer live, after the first track, can you lift the cutter? And
You lift the cutter, how are you going to get the cutter back into the groove? There is no... There's a reason why it takes a long time to start, and then the space between tracks are longer, because they've got to change music, they've got to... so they've got to cut the whole track live all the way through. No lifts.
Well, I had 2 quick questions. I was just curious about the digital format, or the bit depth and sampling.
Okay, this is Bernie Grundman. So he's got basically access to everything. He had a prototype 8X DSD recorder from Sony. He had the previous 4X DSD recorder from Sony. He basically gets anything he wants to as a digital recorder. And he said, Gary, what format do you want? And I said,
Has he got MQA? Is he MQA
no,
certified?
he's not MQA certified. He's not MQA certified. But MQA is an encoding technology after the recording fact. You don't do it during the recording. So basically everything that he had, he has access to. And I turned around and said, Bernie, which one would you pick if you paid for this album? And he said, I'll take my old 2496. They had built it themselves. It was modified within the company. And I think one of Bernie's secret is that he has got one of the most intelligent and the best electronics technicians I've ever met. A guy by the name of Benno May. He rebuilds all of Bernie's lathes almost every 3 months. He's constantly upgrading it. He's rebuilt all his tape decks. He built the entire console. He built the mastering console that we recorded this thing off. And he modifies everything. He builds his own cables. He builds his own, and he built this deck that Bernie prefers to use. And it sounds, we heard a sample between the 2X DSD and this deck. And this deck sounded more organic, more like the musicians were having fun and singing.
Gary, what kind of monitors does he use in a studio?
He built his own monitors. They are built into a wall, so I don't know what they are. According to Benno, he said he used parts from Tannoy and various guys, and he built them himself. The recording engineer uses, I think Tannoy's as well, monitors that he put on his console to monitor with. Now, if these engineers, they know the sound of their monitors, so they know what you can expect when you get at home. The recording sounds nothing like in his studio on my system. But because they know their system so well, they internally compensate. And that was something that I was talking to Bernie about. He knows that his monitors boom at this frequency. He knows that his monitors are muddy at this other frequency. As long as he knows that, he knows what to listen for, and that he masters for that.
How many sides did you do then?
4 sides.
4. So only 2 sides made it to the.
No,
GLP.
we made 4 sides. We made 4 sides to this 45 RPM.
Oh, okay.
We did a total of probably 18 takes over 2 days. Some of those takes were so bad that Bernie took it off the lathe, took out his scribe, scratched it, and put it into the scrap pile. So I only managed to get 12 lacquers out of $120,000 of studio time and musician time and everything. Of those 12 lacquers, 4 went to press for the album. Now keep this under your hats. 4 will be kept for direct to one step. And direct to one step, I think, is even better. An album, this album, I suspect is a direct to one step, because 800 were only ever pressed. All the Jetons, only 800 were pressed. And a stamper will do 800. So if a stamper does 800, what you can do is you can do what's called a one-step convert. You see, from the lacquer, they silver it and plate it, and they make a master. So the lacquer is a positive, it's got grooves. The master is the mirror image, it's the opposite, it's got hills. From the master, you make a mother, which is, again, a positive. From the mother, you make a stamper. And from the stamper, you make LPs. From the one step, from the lacquer, you make what's called a convert. And a convert is basically a stamper. The stamper is different from the master, because the master is very thin, and because all the master is to do is to make a mother. So when you do a direct to one step, it's very much closer to the sound of the lacquer than it is to the sound of the pressing.
One last step in between.
There's no steps in between. There's one step in between, and that's why, Bert, when we were explaining all this and talking to other people who have done the direct to disc and all that, and the trials and tribulations of doing a direct to disc, is that tape is not perfect. When you do a multi-track recording, you might record to a 2-inch 12-track tape. Then that 2-inch 12-track tape gets mixed down into a 2-track tape. Then that 2-track tape gets mastered into a master. Then that master may be used to do your production. Now every step of this tape is almost like every step of the vinyl manufacturing, because there is in playback terms, there is the RIAA pre-emphasis, and then your phono stage does the RIAA de-emphasis. And some people believe that this is the bigger the pre-emphasis and the de-emphasis is does more damage to the music signal than all the pressing and converts. Tape is the same thing. You've got your bias frequency and your pre-emphasis, then when you play back, there's the re-emphasis. So you've got your NAB or IEC, and if you get it wrong, or Bernie showed me that if you recorded on this machine and you played back on that machine, it sounds different from you played on that machine and you played back on that machine. You know, it might have to do with alignment, it might have to do with whatever. But these are some of the lessons that they learned in the studio and that they don't do. Yes.
Yeah, the big difference between tape machines, as I understand, is in the low frequencies, particularly where you end up, because of the way the tape wraps around the head, the recording doesn't take place in a uniform place on the tape based on frequency. At low frequencies it takes place because the tape still is being influenced by the head. So what you end up with is a low frequency response which is somewhat irregular, and each different head shape will have a different irregularity. So the best way to make to play back a tape is to play it back on the same machine backwards, because it undoes the head bumps of that machine and gives you the flattest low frequency response. So it's like you can't swap between machines without impunity, and that's one of the big factors.
You play it backwards on the same machine.
You play it backwards on the same machine.
Keith,
Yeah, you can do.
can you make a machine that will play
Some
it
of the, right.
Yeah, the upper studio machine will have reverse play feature
Right.
for that.
So, there you go.
Okay, something else to learn. So there's so many things to learn in this. So I thought that after all this, you know, everything would be done, and I would get my test pressings, and then we'll make lots of money and all that. But no. And at the end of it, we will barely break even if none of us get actually paid for doing this. So my time goes in free, everybody else's time goes in free, and we will barely break even on 3,000 copies being sold to distributors. But
So it seems like the profit will be in the CDs or the SACDs downstream,
We hope.
not the actual
yeah,
disc.
not
That's
the
a break even.
Yeah, the actual direct-to-disc is basically a break-even. But you know, I just wanted the best possible source when I'm doing development and design for my stuff. So I'm willing to put in this effort. I don't know how people who do this as a business actually makes money out direct-to-disc.
Are the musicians in the free labor pool?
No, the musicians were paid for 6 months of practice.
6 months?
Yeah, I paid them for 6 months to
Wow.
practice
Yeah.
this album, and Anne in the 6 months also composed 3 new songs for the album. So the arrangements we paid for the arrangements. The only free labor pool were the 2 executive directors.
Right.
You know, I guess we are the honorary producers, not the executive producers.
Take a break.
A question about that. So you have a 96 by 24 digital master?
No, it's not a digital master. It is a digital backup. And the reason Bernie made us sign that this backup is not to be used for production is because whenever you master, you actually have to master for the medium that you are delivering it on. You know, when you master for vinyl, it's different from when you're mastering for CD, and we are different from when you're mastering for CD. For Bernie's studio anyway, for the tape he does the least, for the CDs, digital, he does the most, and for vinyl it's somewhere in between.
So this digital backup isn't ever going to be available?
Not the
for sale?
backup itself. We will make sure that it sounds good first.
But you're gonna master off the backup, right? Is that what he's gonna do?
The plan is to listen to the tape on the same machine that was recorded at in Bernie's studio, listen to the backup on his DACs, and figure out which one we want to use. It was already telling that when I asked Michael Ross, you know, Anne wants to produce a CD quickly because she's got fans that are not audiophiles who will pay $100 for an LP. We want to do this, and his response, his email back to me was, do it from tape, at least that is worth listening to.